My name's Jason, and until recently, I thought I had everything figured out. I'm 45, been married to my wife, Laura, for 18 years, and we have two teenage kids, Emma, 17, and Ryan, 15. We met back in college, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was the one. Laura had this way about her, a combination of beauty, wit, and confidence that was impossible to resist. We started dating, and before long, we were inseparable. She was my best friend, my partner in crime, and the love of my life. We got married right after college, and everything seemed perfect. We built a life together, had kids, bought a house in the suburbs, and settled into what I thought was a pretty damn good marriage. We had our ups and downs, sure, but who doesn't? For the most part, we were happy. Or so I thought. Laura works in real estate. She's always been driven, ambitious, the kind of person who won't take no for an answer. Her job kept her busy, but she always made time for the family, or at least, that's how it used to be. Over the past year or so, things started to change. It was subtle at first. She started working later, spending more time on her phone, and was always busy with one thing or another. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, who hasn't had a busy spell at work? But then the changes became harder to ignore. Laura started getting dressed up more often, even when she wasn't going to work. She'd put on makeup and perfume to run errands or meet up with clients, which struck me as odd. We used to joke about how she couldn't care less about what she looked like when she was just running to the store. But now, she was spending hours getting ready for what seemed like no reason. Our sex life also took a nosedive. We used to be pretty active in that department, even after 2 kids and nearly 2 decades of marriage. But lately, she was always tired or not in the mood. She stopped initiating, and when I tried, she'd push me away with some excuse or another. I tried to be understanding, maybe it was stress, hormones, who knows. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The final straw came a few weeks ago. It was a Saturday, and Laura had mentioned she had to meet a client for a house showing. I didn't think much of it until she left the house. She was wearing this dress I hadn't seen in years, something she used to wear when we went out on date nights. Her makeup was perfect, her hair was done just right, and she even put on that perfume I got her for our anniversary, the one she only wore on special occasions. I should have said something right then, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there, pretending everything was fine, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. She was gone for hours, and when she came back, she was distant, almost like she didn't even see me. That night, as she lay in bed next to me, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day in my mind, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. That's when I started paying closer attention. I began to notice things I hadn't before, the way she always had her phone on her, how she'd get texts late at night and wouldn't let me see who they were from, how she'd get defensive if I asked her about her day. The more I looked, the more suspicious I became. I'm not a paranoid guy. I've always trusted Laura, but something was off. So, I did something I never thought I'd do, I started snooping. I went through her phone, her emails, her social media. I felt like an idiot, like some insecure teenager, but I had to know. What I found wasn't much, just a few cryptic messages from someone named M, but it was enough to set off alarm bells. That's when it hit me, my wife might be cheating on me. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I didn't know what to do or how to confront her. I didn't even know if I had the courage to find out the truth. And that's how my life began to unravel. The woman I loved, the one I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, might be hiding something from me, something that could destroy everything we've built together. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And so, I decided to dig deeper, to find out what Laura was really up to. Little did I know, the truth would be more devastating than I could ever imagine. After I had that gut-wrenching realization that Laura might be cheating on me, my mind went into overdrive. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and every time I looked at her, all I could see was this huge question mark looming over our marriage. Was she really cheating? Or was I just losing it? I needed to know for sure, and I wasn't going to let it rest until I had answers. I decided to do what any guy would do when he's stuck in a situation like this. I started digging. I needed to catch her in the act, or at least get some solid proof. Snooping through her phone didn't give me much, just those vague texts from someone named M. I had no idea who this M was, and that only made things worse. Every guy she talked to, every client she mentioned, became a suspect in my mind. That's when I decided to take things up a notch. I installed a small tracking app on her phone when she wasn't looking. It's not something I'm proud of, but at that point, I was desperate. I needed to know where she was going and who she was meeting. I told myself it was justified, that I had a right to know if my wife was sneaking around behind my back. For a few days, nothing out of the ordinary popped up. She went to work, ran errands, and came home just like she always did. But then, one Friday afternoon, she told me she was meeting a client for lunch, another house showing. I watched her leave the house in that same dress, looking too good for a simple client meeting. I waited until she was out of sight, then checked the tracker on my phone. She wasn't heading to the usual spots, no fancy restaurant or upscale neighborhood. Instead, the app showed her driving across town to a more secluded area. My heart started pounding. This wasn't normal. I grabbed my keys and followed her. It wasn't hard to find her. The tracker led me to a small motel on the edge of town. You know the type, the kind of place where people go to do things they don't want anyone else to know about. My blood was boiling at this point. I parked a block away, trying to keep my cool as I walked towards the motel. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like everything around me was moving in slow motion. When I got to the motel, I spotted her car right away. It was parked in the back, hidden from the main road. I stood there for a moment, just staring at it, hoping I was wrong, praying she was just here for some weird, innocent reason. But deep down, I knew the truth. I made my way to the front desk, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked the clerk if he'd seen a woman matching Laura's description. He gave me a look, like he knew exactly what I was there for. Room 14, he said, pointing down the hallway. I could barely breathe as I walked toward the room. My hands were shaking, and my head was spinning with a mix of rage, fear, and heartbreak. What was I about to see? What was I going to do? When I got to the door, I didn't even knock. I just stood there for a moment, listening. I heard muffled voices, laughter. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and then I kicked the door open. The sight that greeted me is something I'll never forget. Laura was there, lying on the bed, her dress half off, with some guy on top of her. They both looked up, shocked, as I burst into the room. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. Then, all hell broke loose. The guy, I assumed, jumped up, scrambling to pull on his clothes. He was younger than me, tall, fit, and looked like he spent way too much time at the gym. But I didn't care. All I saw was red. Before he could say a word, I lunged at him. He tried to duck, but I was faster. My fist connected with his jaw, and I felt a satisfying crack. He stumbled back, crashing into the wall, but I wasn't done. I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the ground. I could hear Laura screaming, but her voice barely registered. All I could focus on was this piece of shit who thought he could come into my life and take what was mine. I punched him again, harder this time, feeling the bones in my hand crunch against his face. Blood splattered everywhere, his nose, his mouth, all over the motel floor. He tried to fight back, swinging at me wildly, but he was no match. I was fueled by pure, unfiltered rage. Every punch was for the years I spent trusting Laura, for every lie she told me, for every time she made me feel like I was the crazy one. Who the fuck do you think you are? I shouted, slamming his head into the floor. You think you can just fuck my wife and get away with it? He tried to speak, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. I punched him again, harder, feeling his skull bounce off the floor. I wanted to beat him until he couldn't stand, until he couldn't even look at another woman again. By this point, Laura was trying to pull me off him, screaming at me to stop, crying that I was going to kill him. I could barely hear her, could barely see anything but this asshole beneath me. But eventually, her voice broke through, and I realized what I was doing. I let go of him, shoving him away as I stood up. He lay there, bloodied and broken, moaning in pain. I looked down at him, my fists still clenched, and spat on him. "You're lucky I don't finish this," I snarled. Then I turned to Laura. She was a mess, crying, shaking, her makeup smeared across her face. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the anger came flooding back. This was her fault. She did this. She brought this piece of shit into our lives and tore everything apart. I stared at her, trying to find the right words, but all I could manage was a low, furious, "Why?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, sobbing, trying to cover herself up. It was pathetic. Disgusting. I didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to hear her try to justify what she'd done. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her and her lover behind. I didn't even look back as I headed to my car. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. I had no idea what to do next. All I knew was that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie, and the woman I loved had just shattered my entire world. I didn't run. I wasn't going to let Laura off that easy, and I wasn't about to give up everything I'd built just because she decided to throw it all away. The drive home was a blur of rage, hurt, and a strange, eerie calm that settled over me as I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were still raw from the beating I'd given her lover, but I barely felt the pain. All I could think about was what I was going to say to her when she got home. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the house we'd lived in for the past 10 years. It looked the same as it always did, quiet, peaceful, like nothing had changed. But everything was different now. The life I thought I had was gone, ripped apart by the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my friend, my everything. When I finally stepped out of the car and walked into the house, it felt like stepping into enemy territory. Every room, every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall seemed to mock me, reminding me of the life we'd built together, the life she had just destroyed. I went straight to the living room, poured myself a drink, and sat down on the couch, waiting for her to come home. She didn't keep me waiting long. Maybe half an hour later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. The door creaked open, and I heard her footsteps hesitating in the hallway before she finally stepped into the living room. I didn't look up right away, just stared into my glass, trying to keep my temper in check. "Jason," her voice was small, trembling, like she was afraid of what might happen next. And she damn well should have been. I took a slow sip of my drink, then set the glass down on the coffee table. Finally, I looked up at her. She looked like a mess, hair disheveled, makeup smeared, eyes red and swollen from crying. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but that part was drowned out by the tidal wave of anger and betrayal that surged through me. "Why?" I asked, my voice low and cold. "Why did you do it?" She started crying again, tears streaming down her face as she tried to speak. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. "Bullshit, Laura. You don't just happen to end up in a motel room with another man. You planned this. You made a choice." She shook her head, sobbing harder now. "No, Jason, it wasn't like that. Don't lie to me," I roared, standing up so fast that the coffee table shook. "I saw you. I saw everything. You were going to fuck him, Laura, and you're going to stand there and tell me it wasn't what it looked like?" She flinched, her whole body shaking as she wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I scoffed, pacing the room as I tried to get a grip on my emotions. You're sorry? Sorry for what, Laura? Sorry for getting caught? Sorry for betraying me? Sorry for destroying our family? What exactly are you sorry for? She didn't answer. She just stood there, crying, as if that would somehow make everything better. But it didn't. It only made me angrier. How could she stand there and cry after what she'd done? How could she expect me to just forgive her, to pretend like nothing happened? Who the hell is he? I demanded. Who's this, you've been sneaking around with? She hesitated, biting her lip as if she didn't want to tell me. But I wasn't in the mood for games. I stepped closer, towering over her, my voice low and menacing. Tell me, Laura. Who is he? His name is Mark, she whispered, barely audible. He's a client. A client? I repeated, incredulous. You're fucking a client? Is that why you've been dressing up, spending all this time away? Meeting your client at a damn motel? She shook her head desperately. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was just, he made me feel. I cut her off, my voice icy. Don't you dare. Don't you fucking dare try to justify this. You made a choice, Laura. You chose him over me. Over us. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, please don't leave me. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Leave her? The thought had crossed my mind 1,000 times on the drive home, but now that she was here, now that I was standing in front of her, I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. Part of me wanted to throw her out, to end this nightmare and move on. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, couldn't imagine life without her. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, I still loved her. I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive you. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Please, Jason. Please, just give me a chance. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy, I'll quit my job, whatever it takes. Just, don't leave me. Don't break up our family. Our family. The thought of Emma and Ryan, of what this would do to them, hit me like a ton of bricks. They were innocent in all of this, and the last thing I wanted was to hurt them. But how could I stay? How could I live under the same roof as the woman who betrayed me? I need time, I finally said, my voice cold and detached. I need time to figure out what I want. She nodded frantically. Take all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I swear, Jason, I'll never see him again. I'll never speak to him. I'll cut him out of my life completely. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the couch. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and slammed the door behind me. As I sat on the bed, the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. I was stuck in a house with a woman I could barely stand to look at, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that she was sorry, that she could change. But I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. Could I forgive her? Could I find it in myself to move past this, to rebuild what she had so carelessly destroyed? Or was this the end, the moment when everything fell apart for good? I didn't have any answers. All I had was anger, hurt, and the overwhelming sense that nothing would ever be the same again. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a storm of anger, betrayal, and confusion. I kept replaying the events of the day over and over in my head, finding her in that motel room, the pathetic look on her lover's face, and Laura's sobbing pleas for forgiveness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, and it made my blood boil all over again. I knew I couldn't just let this go. She needed to understand the full weight of what she had done, and so did everyone else. By morning, I had made up my mind. If Laura thought she could just cry her way out of this, she was dead wrong. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person she really was. She had betrayed me, destroyed our family, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. Laura was already up when I came downstairs. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were puffy, her face pale, and she was hovering around the kitchen like she didn't know what to do with herself. She flinched when she saw me, probably expecting another round of yelling or icy silence. But I was calm, too calm, and that seemed to scare her more than anything. "I'm going out," I said flatly, grabbing my keys from the counter. "Jason, wait," she started, stepping toward me, her voice shaky. "Please, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out what we're going to do." I paused for a moment, looking at her with cold eyes. "We will. But first, I have some calls to make." She looked confused, but I didn't give her a chance to ask any questions. I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, and got into my car. I had a plan, and I was going to stick to it. First, I headed to my brother's house. Mark and I had always been close, and if there was anyone who needed to know the truth about what Laura had done, it was him. As I drove, I thought about how this conversation was going to go. Mark was protective of me, always had been, and I knew he'd be furious when he found out what Laura had done. When I pulled up to his house, I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Mark answered almost immediately, looking surprised to see me so early in the morning. "Jason? What's up? Everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice strained. "It's about Laura." He nodded and stepped aside, letting me in. We sat down in his living room, and for a moment, I didn't know where to start. "How do you tell your brother that your wife of nearly 2 decades has been cheating on you?" But I didn't have the luxury of hesitation. I had to get it out, had to make it real. "Laura's been cheating on me," I said bluntly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Mark's eyes widened in shock. "What? Are you serious?" I nodded, feeling the anger bubble up again as I recounted the story. "I caught her yesterday, in a motel, with some guy. She's been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, and God knows how long it's been going on." He sat back, running a hand through his hair, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Jesus, Jason. I don't even know what to say. That's fucked up." "Yeah, it is," I muttered, gripping the arm of the couch to steady myself. "And she's trying to play the victim, trying to cry her way out of it like it's just some mistake she made. But I'm not going to let her get away with it, Mark. Everyone needs to know the truth." Mark nodded slowly, his expression hardening. "You're right. She can't just sweep this under the rug. You want me to talk to Mom and Dad? Or do you want to do it?" "I'll tell them," I said, my voice firm. "But I need you to be there. I don't know how they're going to take it, and I can't deal with this on my own." "Of course," Mark said, leaning forward. "We'll get through this, Jason. You're not alone." We agreed to meet at our parents' house later that morning. Mark offered to drive, and I accepted. I wasn't sure I could make it there without breaking down. The drive was tense, filled with the kind of silence that happens when there's nothing left to say, only actions to take. When we arrived, our parents were already there, sitting in the living room, sipping coffee like it was just another Sunday. "Jason, Mark, what brings you two here so early?" my mom asked, smiling as we walked in. She was in her 60s, a warm, caring woman who always believed in the good in people. This was going to crush her. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk." Their smiles faded as they looked at me, sensing the gravity of the situation. My dad set down his coffee cup, leaning forward with a concerned expression. "What's going on, son?" "It's about Laura," I began, feeling the lump in my throat grow bigger with each word. she's been cheating on me." My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the news. "Cheating? Are you sure?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. She looked like she wanted to believe it was some sort of mistake. "I caught her in the act," I said, my voice cold. "I saw her with him." She admitted it. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to me. "Oh, Jason. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say." "I don't need you to say anything," I said, pulling back from her touch. "I just needed you to know. I can't keep this to myself." My dad spoke up, his voice rough with anger. "That woman had the nerve to cheat on you after everything you've done for her? For this family?" I nodded, feeling the rage simmer just below the surface. "Yeah. She did. And I'm not going to keep quiet about it. I'm going to tell everyone." They both looked at me, unsure of what to say. My dad was visibly furious, and my mom looked heartbroken. But I didn't have time to comfort them. I had more people to see, more truths to reveal. Next, I went to see Laura's best friend, Karen. She and Laura had been close since college, and I knew she'd have a hard time believing what I had to tell her. But she needed to know, and I wasn't going to spare her feelings just because she was Laura's friend. Karen lived a few blocks away, and I drove there alone. I needed to do this on my own. When she answered the door, she looked surprised to see me. "Jason? What's going on? Is everything okay?" she asked, smiling in that friendly way that people do when they have no idea what's about to hit them. "Can we talk?" I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "It's about Laura." Karen's smile faded, and she stepped aside, letting me in. We sat down in her living room, and I wasted no time getting to the point. "Laura's been cheating on me," I said flatly, watching her reaction. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? No, that can't be true. Laura wouldn't." "She would," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "She did. I caught her yesterday with another man." Karen's face paled, and she shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe this. Are you sure, Jason? Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Karen," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "She's been lying to me, to all of us. I thought you should know." She looked like she'd been punched in the gut. "Oh my God. Jason, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." "I'm not here for apologies," I said coldly. "I'm here to make sure everyone knows who she really is. She's not going to hide behind her lies anymore." Karen nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand. I'll talk to her. But Jason, please, don't do anything rash. Give yourself time to think this through." I didn't answer her. I just stood up and left, slamming the door behind me. I was done with people telling me to calm down, to think things through. I had thought it through, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. The last stop was Laura's parents' house. This was the hardest one, but it had to be done. They deserved to know what their daughter had done, what kind of person she really was. I drove there in a daze, barely registering the world around me. By the time I arrived, I was numb, my emotions buried under layers of cold determination. Laura's mom, Susan, opened the door, smiling warmly when she saw me. "Jason. What a nice surprise. Come in, come in." I forced a smile, stepping inside. "Is Tom here? I need to talk to both of you." She nodded, leading me into the living room. Tom was there, watching TV, and he looked up, smiling when he saw me. "Hey, Jason. What brings you here?" I sat down, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. "I need to tell you something. About Laura." Their expressions turned serious, sensing the gravity in my voice. Susan sat down next to Tom, and they both looked at me expectantly. Laura's been cheating on me, I said, my voice steady. I caught her yesterday with another man. Susan gasped, her hand flying to her chest. What? No, no, that can't be true. Tom's face darkened, and he clenched his fists. Are you sure, Jason? This isn't some kind of mistake, is it? There's no mistake, I said firmly. I caught her in the act. She admitted it. Susan started crying, and Tom looked like he was about to explode with anger. That ungrateful, after everything you've done for her, for this family, how could she do this? I shook my head, feeling the familiar surge of rage. I don't know. But I'm not going to keep it a secret. Everyone needs to know what she's done. They both looked at me, torn between their loyalty to their daughter and their anger at what she had done. But I didn't need their approval. I had said what I came to say, and that was enough. I stood up, ready to leave, but Susan grabbed my hand, her eyes pleading. Jason, please, don't do anything drastic. We can work this out, as a family. I pulled my hand away, my voice cold. There is no family anymore, Susan. She destroyed that. And with that, I walked out, leaving them behind. The drive home was quiet, the streets almost deserted. I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. All I felt was emptiness, a void where my life used to be. When I got home, Laura was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of a day. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I've told everyone. They know what you've done. They know who you really are. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. Jason, please. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't care, I said coldly. You did this. You destroyed everything. And now you have to live with the consequences. She looked up at me, her face twisted in agony. Are you going to leave me? I stared at her, my heart a stone in my chest. I don't know. I need time to think. But don't think for a second that I'll ever forget what you did. With that, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her to her misery. As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I realized that I had no idea what was going to happen next. All I knew was that the life I had before was gone, shattered by the woman who was supposed to love me. And no amount of revenge or retribution could ever change that. The days after I exposed Laura's betrayal to our friends and family were a blur of tense silence and simmering anger. She spent most of her time holed up in the guest room, trying to avoid me, probably trying to figure out what to do next. As for me, I kept busy, doing anything to distract myself from the pain and betrayal that weighed on me like a lead blanket. But there was one thing that I couldn't get out of my mind: Mark, her lover. The beating I gave him at the motel had been satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Every time I thought about that smug bastard touching my wife, being with her in ways that should have been reserved for me, it made my blood boil all over again. I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed to make him pay for what he'd done. I needed to destroy him. I started by finding out everything I could about Mark. It wasn't hard. Laura had left her phone lying around, and after everything that had happened, I didn't feel any guilt about going through it. I found his last name in one of their text exchanges, and from there, it was easy to dig up the details. Mark Thompson, 35, real estate developer. Married, 2 kids. His life looked perfect from the outside, just like mine had. But underneath that shiny exterior was a man who had no problem fucking another man's wife. I wasn't interested in confronting him again, that wasn't going to satisfy me this time. No, I wanted to hit him where it really hurt. I wanted to ruin his life the way he had ruined mine. My first step was to gather evidence. I couldn't just go after him with nothing to back me up. I needed proof of the affair, proof that would stand up to scrutiny and destroy his reputation. I went back through Laura's phone, saving every text, every photo, every incriminating piece of evidence I could find. It made me sick to see the way they talked to each other, the way she had opened up to him in ways she hadn't with me in years. But I pushed through, driven by the need to make him pay. Once I had enough, I made my next move. I reached out to Mark's wife. Her name was Sarah, and from what I could tell, she had no idea what her husband had been up to. I debated for a long time whether or not I should tell her. It wasn't fair to drag her into this mess, to shatter her world the way mine had been shattered. But I needed her help, and in the end, my anger won out over my guilt. I found her email address online, and one night, when Laura was asleep, I sent her a message. I kept it short and to the point, attaching a few of the more damning pieces of evidence. The subject line read, "Your husband is cheating on you." It took a couple of days for her to respond. During that time, I was on edge, constantly checking my email, waiting for a reply. When it finally came, it was brief, just a phone number and a request to call her. I hesitated for a moment before dialing the number, not sure what I was going to say. But once she answered, the words came tumbling out. I told her everything, how I'd caught them, what I'd found, how long it had been going on. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if she'd hung up. But then I heard a soft, trembling voice. "I had no idea," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I knew something was off, but I never thought." "I'm sorry," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. "I didn't want to hurt you, but you deserve to know." There was another long pause, and then she asked, "What do we do now?" That was the question I'd been waiting for. I explained my plan to her, laying out the steps I'd already taken. She was quiet as I spoke, but I could tell she was listening carefully, absorbing every detail. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "I want in," she said, her voice steady now, filled with a cold determination that matched my own. "If he thinks he can do this to me, to our family, he's got another thing coming." We spent the next week planning our revenge. It wasn't easy. Mark was a powerful man, well-connected, and careful about keeping up appearances. But Sarah had access to parts of his life that I didn't, and she was more than willing to use that to our advantage. The first step was to gather more evidence. Sarah planted a hidden camera in their home office, where Mark conducted most of his business calls. It didn't take long for us to get what we needed: footage of him talking to Laura, making plans to meet up, and even bragging about their affair to one of his friends. It was all there, laid out in front of us like a gift. Once we had the footage, it was time to strike. Sarah took the lead on this part, using her connections in the local community to spread the word. She sent anonymous tips to Mark's business partners, his colleagues, even some of their friends. She made sure everyone knew what kind of man he really was, and the video evidence we had collected left no room for doubt. The fallout was swift and brutal. Mark's business deals started to fall apart as his partners pulled out, not wanting to be associated with a man who had become the center of a scandal. His reputation was in tatters, his credibility destroyed. The news spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before the media caught wind of it. Articles were written, stories were aired, and Mark became the subject of public ridicule and scorn. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to hit him where it really hurt, his family. Sarah filed for divorce, citing adultery and providing all the evidence we had gathered. She went after him with everything she had, and with the proof we'd collected, there was no way he could deny it. The courts were ruthless, stripping him of custody of his kids, awarding Sarah a significant portion of his assets, and leaving him with little more than his shattered pride. I watched from the sidelines as Mark's life crumbled around him, feeling a grim satisfaction with every new blow that landed. But even as I reveled in his downfall, I couldn't shake the emptiness that gnawed at me. Destroying Mark didn't change what had happened, didn't fix the hole Laura had torn in my heart. It didn't bring back the life I'd lost or erase the betrayal that still haunted me every time I closed my eyes. The final act of our revenge came when I leaked the video footage online. It spread like wildfire, circulating through social media, hitting every corner of the internet. There was no way Mark could escape the consequences now. His face was everywhere, his dirty little secret exposed to the world. He tried to fight back, of course. He hired lawyers, tried to sue for defamation, but it was too late. The damage was done. His career was over, his family gone, and his name forever associated with scandal and disgrace. I didn't feel the relief I thought I would when it was all over. Instead, I felt hollow, like a shell of the man I used to be. I had destroyed Mark, torn his life apart piece by piece, but it didn't bring me the closure I craved. It didn't make the pain go away. It didn't make Laura's betrayal hurt any less. As I sat alone in the house that night, staring at the evidence of my revenge on the computer screen, I realized that I had been fighting a battle I couldn't win. Mark was ruined, but so was I. I had let my anger and hatred consume me, and in the process, I had lost a part of myself that I might never get back. Laura came home late that night, her eyes red from crying. She looked at me, her face filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at her, the woman who had once been my everything, and wonder where we went wrong. She sat down next to me, and for a long time, we didn't say anything. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. Finally, she spoke. "Jason, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but, is there any chance we can fix this? Is there any chance you could ever forgive me?" I looked at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes, and for a moment, I almost believed that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back from this. But then I remembered what she had done, the lies, the betrayal, and the hurt that had cut so deep I wasn't sure I could ever heal. "I don't know," I said quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Laura." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw her for what she really was, just a person, flawed, broken, and desperate for redemption. But I wasn't sure if I could give it to her. We sat there in silence, two broken people in a broken home, each of us wondering if there was any way to pick up the pieces of the life we had once shared. But deep down, I knew that the damage had been done, and no amount of revenge or forgiveness could ever make things right again. The days after I destroyed Mark's life were eerily quiet. The storm of rage that had driven me for so long had finally passed, leaving me with a strange sense of emptiness. I had done what I set out to do. I had made him pay for what he'd done, had ruined his reputation, and left his life in shambles. But as the dust settled, I was left with a nagging question that I couldn't shake: what now? Laura and I barely spoke in those days. The tension between us was thick, and every time we were in the same room, the silence was deafening. She spent most of her time with the kids, trying to pretend everything was normal, while I kept to myself, lost in my own thoughts. But there was one conversation we couldn't avoid forever, the conversation about what came next, about where we went from here. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Laura and I finally sat down to talk. It was a conversation that had been a long time coming, and both of us knew it. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless meals, celebrated birthdays, and planned our future. Now, it felt like a battleground, a place where the final decisions would be made. Laura looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, her eyes still red from crying. She had been trying so hard to keep it together for the kids, but I could see the cracks in her armor. She was breaking down, just like I was. But we couldn't put this off any longer. "We need to talk about the divorce," I began, my voice steady, though it felt like a lie. Nothing about this felt steady. She nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. "I know." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The word divorce hung between us like a dark cloud, a final acknowledgement that there was no going back, no fixing what had been broken. "I've been thinking about the kids," I continued, trying to keep my voice even. "We need to figure out what's best for them." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. "Jason, I don't want to take them away from you." "I know," I said, softening my tone. And I don't want to take them away from you either. But we need to be realistic here. They need stability, and right now, I don't know if I can give them that. Laura bit her lip, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. What are you saying? Do you want them to stay with me? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. The thought of not seeing Emma and Ryan every day, of not being there to watch them grow up, was like a knife in my chest. But I knew what I had to do. I had to think about what was best for them, not what was best for me. I think it would be best if they stayed with you, I said, the words coming out slowly, painfully. At least for now. They need some sense of normalcy, and, with everything that's happened, I don't think I can give them that right now. Laura stared at me, her eyes wide with surprise and something else, maybe gratitude, maybe guilt. Jason, are you sure? I mean, I never wanted this. I never wanted to break up our family. I know, I said, my voice softer now. But it's already broken, Laura. And the kids, they need one of us to be strong for them. You've been their rock through all of this. They need you. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached across the table, hesitating before touching my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't respond either. I just sat there, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made settle over me like a heavy blanket. What about you? She asked, her voice trembling. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted. I'll figure something out. I'll still see the kids, of course. We'll work out a visitation schedule, and I'll make sure they know I'm still here for them. But for now, I think it's best if they stay with you. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Jason. I know I've said it a million times, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. I know, I said, my voice tinged with sadness. But you did, Laura. You hurt me, you hurt all of us, and now we're all paying the price. She sobbed quietly, her hand still resting on mine. For a moment, I thought about pulling her into a hug, comforting her the way I used to, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. There was too much between us now, too much pain, too much betrayal. We'll get through this, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. We'll figure out a way to make this work for the kids. That's all that matters now. She nodded again, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. You're right. We need to do what's best for them. But Jason, I don't want this to be the end. I know it's a lot to ask, but, maybe, someday, we can find a way to forgive each other. Maybe we can be friends again, for the kids' sake. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for so long, the woman who had been my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could somehow find a way to rebuild something out of the wreckage of our marriage. But I wasn't sure if I could ever get there. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Laura. But for the kids' sake, I'll try to be civil. I'll try to be something. She nodded, understanding the unspoken words between us. We both knew that whatever came next, it would never be the same. The trust, the love, the bond we had once shared, it was all gone, shattered by her betrayal. All that was left was the broken pieces, and neither of us knew how to put them back together. We spent the next few hours discussing the details, how we would tell the kids, how we would handle the logistics of the divorce, the division of assets, and the custody arrangements. It was the most painful conversation I'd ever had, every word a reminder of how much we had lost. When we finally finished, I felt drained, like I had nothing left to give. Laura looked the same, her face pale and her eyes dull, as if all the life had been sucked out of her. We'll tell the kids tomorrow, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. We need to be on the same page when we do. They deserve that much. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. I stood up, and she followed suit, lingering for a moment as if she wanted to say something else, but the words never came. Instead, she just looked at me, a sad, broken expression on her face, before turning and walking upstairs to her room. I stayed downstairs for a while, staring at the empty house, the quiet rooms that had once been filled with laughter and love. It felt like a ghost of the life I used to know, a reminder of what could have been if things had gone differently. But they hadn't. And now, all I could do was move forward, one painful step at a time. The next day, Laura and I sat down with Emma and Ryan in the living room, the place where we had shared so many happy memories. But today was different. Today, we were going to tear their world apart, just as ours had been torn apart. Laura spoke first, her voice trembling as she explained what was happening. She told them that we were getting a divorce, that things between us had changed, and that it wasn't their fault. She tried to put on a brave face, tried to be strong for them, but I could see the cracks. She was breaking down, just like I was. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to be as gentle as possible. I told them that I loved them, that nothing would ever change that, and that we would both still be there for them, even if we weren't living together anymore. I could see the confusion, the hurt, and the fear in their eyes, and it broke my heart. "Why can't you just stay together?" Emma asked, her voice small and trembling. "Why can't we just be a family?" I felt a lump in my throat, struggling to find the words to explain the unexplainable. "Sometimes, things happen, sweetie. Sometimes people change, and it's not always something we can fix. But we'll always be your parents, and we'll always love you, no matter what." Ryan didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his fists clenched in his lap. I could see the anger in his eyes, the way he was trying so hard to keep it together. It killed me to see him like that, to know that I had failed him, failed both of them. After what felt like an eternity, the conversation ended. The kids were devastated, and there was nothing Laura or I could do to make it better. We had done this to them, and now we had to live with the consequences. As I watched them walk upstairs to their rooms, I felt a deep, crushing sense of guilt. I had always promised to protect them, to give them the best life possible. But now, all I had given them was pain and uncertainty. Laura and I stood in silence, neither of us knowing what to say. The reality of our situation had hit us full force, and there was no escaping it. "I'll pack some things and stay with Mark for a while," I finally said, breaking the silence. "It'll give you and the kids some space to adjust." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you, Jason. For everything." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked upstairs to pack my bags, my heart heavy with the weight of what we had just done. As I packed, I thought about everything that had led us to this moment, the lies, the betrayal, the anger, and the revenge. It all seemed so pointless now, so empty. We had torn each other apart, and for what? There was no victory here, no satisfaction, only a deep, gnawing sense of loss. When I finished packing, I took one last look around the room. It had once been our sanctuary, a place where we shared our dreams, our fears, our love. Now, it was just a reminder of what we had lost. I walked downstairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. Laura was waiting at the door, her face pale and her eyes filled with a sorrow I had never seen before. "Take care of the kids," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "They need you now more than ever." "I will," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I promise." I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything more. I stepped outside, feeling the cool evening air hit my face, and walked to my car. As I drove away, I couldn't help but feel like I was leaving behind more than just a house. I was leaving behind a part of myself, a part of my life that I would never get back. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: the life I had known, the life I had built with Laura, was over. And now, I had to figure out how to start over, how to pick up the pieces of my shattered world and move forward. But as I drove into the night, the weight of the decision I had made pressed down on me, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice, or if I had just walked away from the only thing that ever really mattered. The next few weeks passed in a haze. I moved into my brother Mark's place, a temporary arrangement that felt anything but temporary. Mark tried to make me feel at home, but no matter how comfortable the couch was or how much he reassured me, it didn't change the fact that my life was in pieces. My kids were living with their mother, and I was a guest in someone else's house, drifting through days that felt as empty as the nights. I tried to stay busy, throwing myself into work, helping out with chores around Mark's house, and doing anything that kept my mind occupied. But every time I had a moment of quiet, the reality of what had happened came crashing down on me. I'd lost my family, my home, and the life I'd spent nearly 2 decades building. All of it gone, all because of one betrayal that had spiraled into a nightmare. Divorce proceedings were set in motion almost immediately after I left. Laura and I had agreed to keep things as amicable as possible, mostly for the kids' sake. We didn't want to drag them through a nasty court battle, and we both knew that fighting over assets or custody would only make things worse. So, we opted for mediation, sitting down with our lawyers to work out the details of the divorce quietly, efficiently, like 2 business partners dissolving a company rather than a couple ending a marriage. Mediation was a surreal experience. We sat across from each other in a sterile conference room, our lawyers doing most of the talking, hashing out the details of who got what. It was all so clinical, so detached, that it was hard to believe we were talking about the end of our marriage, the division of the life we had built together. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but it was impossible to sit there, listening to Laura calmly discuss the terms of our separation without feeling a deep sense of loss. This was the woman I had loved, the mother of my children, the person I had shared my dreams and fears with for nearly 2 decades. And now, here we were, dividing up our possessions like strangers, like none of it had ever mattered. We agreed that Laura would keep the house. It was the right thing to do. Emma and Ryan needed stability, and moving them out of their home would have been too much for them to handle. I kept my car, most of my personal belongings, and a few pieces of furniture that I had a sentimental attachment to. The rest stayed with Laura and the kids. There was no fight over custody. We both knew that the kids would stay with Laura, at least for now. We set up a visitation schedule, weekends, holidays, special occasions. I'd see them every other weekend and have them for a few weeks during the summer. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best we could do under the circumstances. When everything was finally settled, and the papers were ready to be signed, Laura asked if we could talk privately. Our lawyers stepped out of the room, leaving us alone for the first time since this nightmare had begun. She looked at me with those tired, sad eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me with love, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I used to know. "Jason, I know you probably don't believe me, but I really am sorry for everything. I never wanted this to happen." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I know, Laura. I know you're sorry. But it doesn't change anything. We can't go back." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I just want you to know that I'll always care about you. No matter what happened between us, you'll always be the father of my children, and I'll always want what's best for you." Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Despite everything, despite the anger and the betrayal, I still cared about her too. Maybe not in the way I used to, but in a way that acknowledged the life we had shared, the bond we had once had. "I care about you too, Laura," I said quietly. "But we both know this is for the best. We can't keep pretending that everything's going to be okay." She wiped away a tear, nodding in agreement. "I know. I just wish things could have been different." "Me too," I admitted, the words heavy with regret. We sat there in silence for a moment, both of us lost in our own thoughts. There was so much more I wanted to say, so much that I couldn't put into words. But what was the point? Everything that needed to be said had already been said. This was the end, and we both knew it. "Take care of the kids," I finally said, breaking the silence. "They need you right now." "I will," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "And you, take care of yourself, Jason. You deserve to be happy, even if it's not with me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We both stood up, the weight of the moment pressing down on us, and for a brief second, I considered hugging her, one last embrace to say goodbye to everything we had shared. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I just walked out of the room, leaving her behind. The divorce was finalized a few weeks later. The papers arrived in the mail, just another stack of documents to sign, just another formality to close the door on a life that was no longer mine. I signed them, sent them back, and just like that, it was over. The finality of it hit me like a punch to the gut. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in being Laura's husband, in being a father to our kids, in being part of a family. And now, that was gone. I was a divorced man, a part-time dad, a person who had to figure out how to rebuild his life from the ground up. Seeing the kids on weekends was bittersweet. They were trying so hard to adjust, trying to act like everything was normal, but I could see the pain in their eyes. They were hurting, just like I was, and there was nothing I could do to make it better. I tried to make our time together special, taking them out to do fun things, making sure they knew I was still there for them, but it wasn't the same. We all knew it wasn't the same. Mark was a lifesaver during this time. He gave me space when I needed it, but he was always there when I needed to talk, when I needed to vent, when I needed to remember that I wasn't alone in this. We had always been close, but this experience brought us even closer, and I was grateful for that. Eventually, I knew I had to move out of Mark's place and find somewhere of my own. It wasn't that I wasn't welcome, Mark would have let me stay as long as I needed, but I knew that part of healing meant finding my own space, starting fresh. I found a small apartment not too far from the kids, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I moved in quietly, without fanfare, and tried to settle into my new life. Living alone was an adjustment. The silence was the hardest part. I was so used to the noise, the chaos of family life, that the quiet felt almost oppressive. I tried to fill it with music, TV, anything to keep the loneliness at bay, but there were nights when it was just me and the silence, and those were the hardest. But slowly, ever so slowly, I started to find a new rhythm. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. I took up hobbies I had let go of over the years, things that brought me some small measure of joy. It wasn't much, but it was something. The kids came over every other weekend, and I tried to make my apartment feel like home for them, even though it wasn't. We'd cook meals together, watch movies, play games, and for those few days, it almost felt like everything was normal. But when they left, the emptiness returned, a stark reminder of what I had lost. Laura and I kept things civil. We talked when we needed to, about the kids, about logistics, about the things divorced parents have to deal with. It wasn't friendly, exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. We were just two people trying to navigate the aftermath of a broken marriage, trying to do what was best for our children while keeping our own emotions in check. As the months passed, the pain started to dull, just a little. It wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been. I was learning to live with it, learning to move forward, even if I wasn't sure where I was going. Life became a series of small victories and setbacks, a process of rebuilding that was as frustrating as it was necessary. One evening, months after the divorce, Laura called me. It was unusual, most of our communication was done through texts or emails, but I answered, curious and a little apprehensive. "Hey, Jason," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. "I just wanted to check in. See how you're doing." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I'm okay, I guess. How about you?" "I'm hanging in there," she replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about us, about the kids, and I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you?" I echoed, confused. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Thank you for being so understanding, even after everything I did. I know I hurt you, and I know I can't take that back, but I want you to know that I appreciate how you've handled all of this. For the kids, for me, it means a lot." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her that I wasn't as understanding as she thought, that I was still angry, still hurt. But another part of me knew that holding on to that anger wasn't going to do either of us any good. "You're welcome," I said finally, the words feeling strange in my mouth. I just want what's best for everyone." "I know," she said softly. "I do too." There was a long pause, and then she added, "I hope someday we can be friends again, for the kids' sake." I know it's a lot to ask, but, maybe, in time. "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We'll see." We said our goodbyes, and as I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the kind of closure that ties everything up neatly, but it was a step forward, a small piece of the puzzle falling into place. Life after divorce was never going to be easy. There would always be scars, always be memories of what could have been. But I was starting to accept that this was my new reality, that I had to find a way to move forward, not just for myself, but for my kids, for the people who loved me, for the person I was trying to become. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more difficult days, more nights filled with loneliness and doubt. But I also knew that I wasn't alone in this, that I had people who cared about me, who would help me through the tough times. As I sat on the balcony of my apartment that night, looking out at the city lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, just a small, flickering light in the darkness, but it was enough to keep me going. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know where this new path would take me. But for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I was ready to face whatever came next, ready to rebuild, ready to find a new way forward. The end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that I was determined to write on my own terms. And as I sat there, feeling the cool night breeze on my face, I knew that somehow, some way, I was going to be okay.